Hello, beautiful people. It's Dr. Mika Stewart, here to talk to you today about social justice and criminology, the impact of privilege and oppression on the distribution of justice. Let's start with the true or false question. The United States is a land of opportunity. What do you think? Actually, I asked you this question already, so your thoughts should be pretty well developed by now. But in any case, let me tell you what most people think. Most people believe that this is true. Yeah, the United States is a land of opportunity. Well, let's say more. What do we mean by opportunity? An opportunity is a chance to find success. What do we mean by success? Success in the United States is often measured by the acquisition of wealth, power, position, education, and the good life. Oh yeah, the good life. Success means achieving the American dream. Okay, let's talk about that. In 1931, historian James Truslow Adams first publicly defined the American dream. He used the phrase in his book, Epic of America. The American dream is that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. Sounds pretty good to me. The roots of the American dream can be found in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unfortunately, the Founding Fathers weren't concerned about unalienable rights for everyone, only white male landowners. Horatio Alger Jr. is often cited as the father of the American dream. He wrote over 120 of what we call rags to riches fiction stories in the 19th century for working class boys. The theme of his stories was that through hard work and determination, anyone, yes, anyone, can get ahead and become successful. His main character was a boy by the name of Ragged Dick. Now, I don't know about you, but that is not a name that I would like to have, Ragged Dick. But as you can see, that is the title of his book, Ragged Dick. The belief that hard work leads to success is often referred to as the Horatio Alger myth, since it is often not true. If hard work always led to success, then the poorest in our country would actually be the richest, and many of those who are rich would actually be poor. Just ask these hard-working, yet still poor coal miners. So what am I saying? Well, basically, it's that poor people in our country do some of the hardest work of anyone. I'm not saying that my job is not difficult. It is. It's challenging, but it's more intellectual work. And I get to sit at my table, drink some iced tea while I'm grading your, well, let's hope, wonderful papers. And I work in air-conditioned conditions. I'm not digging a ditch. I'm not scrubbing toilets. I'm not doing work that is back-breaking and that is in uncomfortable climate or conditions. And so when we say things like, oh, people are poor because they're lazy, we are not really looking at the reality of their life and their situation. Now, will there be poor people who are poor because they're lazy? Of course. Are there rich people who are rich because they're lazy? Well, maybe not because they're lazy. They may be rich in spite of the fact that they're lazy because they were able to just inherit. So basically, the only point I'm trying to make here is that there's not this direct correlation like we like to believe. It makes things convenient. It makes us able to have something to work towards. It's just that it's not always true. Now, C. Wright Mills talked about this in his book, The Sociological Imagination. C. Wright Mills said that we must distinguish between private problems and public issues, yet still recognize that many problems considered as private problems or personal failings have their roots in the failings of society. He coined the term sociological imagination. To use your sociological imagination is to recognize the structural basis for personal problems, meaning to look at the situation around you, the forces that impact our choices and our opportunities. When we use our sociological imagination, we have a better idea of who or what to blame for some people's inability to get ahead and or even their involvement in crime. If personal failings truly are causing one's struggles, then it's okay to blame the individual. If one's struggles are rooted in inequities in the system, yet we blame the individual, we are blaming the victim. Now, this should sound familiar because this is actually what we talked about in the first module. But I will continue, just in case you missed it. If one's struggles are rooted in inequities in the system, we can and should blame the system. How we view the problem influences our course of action. Do we fix the person? Or do we fix the system? How would we know if the system even needed fixing? Well, let's go back to our question from the beginning, but change it slightly. True or false? The U.S. is a land of equal opportunity. Okay, see, we added that word equal. Does that make a difference? Oh yeah. Many people believe that this is false. Now, given that our whole country is built upon the foundation of liberty and justice and equality and opportunity for all, the degree to which this statement is false is the degree to which we are failing to be a just society. Think about that for a minute. Okay. What is justice, you may ask? Well, let's ask Lady Justice herself. Now, this to the right is not Lady Justice. That's a statue of the Statue of Liberty. And that's she is on Liberty Island in the New York Harbor. Lady Justice is in the Supreme Court building in D.C. She is also a statue. She is a statue of a woman who is holding scales, like balance scales, and in her left hand and in her right hand she is holding a sword, and around her face, or actually covering her eyes, is a blindfold. So let's take a look at what these items symbolize. Well, the blindfold. This gets into the idea that justice is blind, meaning that justice does not see race or class or gender. If we're going to be just and fair, we don't take those things into account that don't really matter. If I'm hiring somebody, what difference does it make how tall they are, unless the job is, I don't know, maybe What would you need to be really tall for? I can't think of anything right now. But if there's no need for a particular characteristic or trait, why make that part of the job process? So the blindfold is there to show that without bias or prejudice, justice is available. The scales mean that there's balance. It means that we're not going to make something harder for one group or the other. One of the ways that we look at fairness, like if you were to go to the store and you were to put in 5 oranges into the scale to see how much they cost, and then the store owner came in and put a brick in there and said, okay, now we see how heavy it is. And you would say, but that's not fair because you've added a brick to my side. Well, yeah, it's not fair. So scales are often a symbol used to represent fairness and balance. Now, in terms of like in the criminal justice system, it represents this idea that we will weigh the evidence. Are you able to show evidence that you're guilty, or is there more evidence showing that you are innocent? And so the scale is used to weigh that. And then we have the sword. The sword is the idea that whoever's in charge has the power. The question that we ask in a just society, though, is that power used for the benefit of the people? So, with those ideas of justice in mind, let's talk about social justice. Social justice occurs when all people, regardless of their social location, have an equitable and fair chance at achieving success. Social justice does not mean that we all have an equal outcome, but it does mean that we all have a fair start. All right, so it's like this. If we are running a race, and it's not saying that for social justice, we all have to cross the finish line at the same time. That would be an equal outcome. No, that's not what it's about. Because remember, the American dream had to do with the person's ability and achievements. But what we don't want, or what wouldn't be just, is if everybody's starting at the starting line, and then the starter says, okay, before I shoot this gun, I would like for you there, lady, and he's pointing to me, I would like for you to go on up 15 yards. And I'm like, really? Okay, that sounds great. And other people are like, well, why does she get to go up? And he's like, did you see that cute face? So I get to move forward. But then other people in the line, he's starting to assess them, and he says, you need to move back about 5 feet. Ooh, you need to move back about 20 feet. Goodness gracious. So he tells people where they get to stand on the line. And then we all start running when he shoots the gun. Well, guess what? I won. But it wasn't a fair race, because simply by the fact that I was cuter, I got a head start. What does cuteness have to do with ability to run, with achievement? Absolutely nothing. Now, it might seem kind of like a silly example, and in a way it is, and yet we will see that appearance actually is a factor that gives some people advantage and other people disadvantage. Now, I ran track when I was in college and high school, and cuteness was not a factor. It was my hard work and determination that played off. Without social justice, some people experience privilege, getting to start 15 feet ahead, while others experience oppression, having to start 5 to 20 feet back, based solely on their social location. Now, we've done a lot of talk. I've mentioned social location quite a bit, and some of you may be wondering, What exactly are you talking about? Okay, so here it is. Your social location has to do with your position in the world. Most aspects of your social location are characteristics about you that you did not choose. Okay, this was not a choice. You were born with these characteristics, which makes them an ascribed status versus an achieved status. An achieved status is the status that you do something to make happen. Like you become a student, that's achieved. An ascribed status has to do with things that you have no control over. Let's take a look at some examples. But before we do, let me make this last point. And that is that your social location influences how you see the world, and it influences how you are seen in the world. Okay? Now, let's take a look at some examples. Race. Did you choose your race? I know I didn't choose mine. I didn't say, you know what? I think today I'm gonna be, let's see, so many to choose from. I think I'll be African American. No, it did not happen like that. Our sex, our sexuality, our social class. If your family has money, lucky you. If your family was poor, wasn't anything that you chose. Ability, our physical ability, our cognitive ability, our emotional psychological ability. Those aren't things that we choose. Religion. Now, in the United States, we do have freedom of religion, but initially, we're born into families that practice a certain religion or no religion at all. But whatever we're born into is our religion. Now that goes the same with social class, because just because you're born into a poor family doesn't mean that you'll stay poor all your life, although the odds are stacked against you, which is pretty much the whole point of this module. And if you're born into the upper class, it doesn't mean that you'll die in the upper class, although the odds are pretty much in your favor that you will maintain that status. Age. Yeah, we sure don't choose age. I mean, I'm telling you, I don't care how much oil of Olay you use, you cannot turn back the hands of time. Rogaine cannot regain your youth. Era. Okay, now this one may seem like a strange one, but let me tell you what I mean by this. We're all born into a certain time period, okay? I mean, are you born? Some of you are born in the 21st century, and I was born in the 20th century. Oh my goodness, that makes me sound so old. Now, how we see the world and how we're treated by the world is really strongly influenced by not so much that when we're just like maybe just 20, 30 years apart, but when we're looking at centuries. Okay, so one way to look at it is the way certain people were treated in the 19th century. I find it very, very interesting as I'm reading this book right now on some things that happened in the 19th century around the Civil War and some of the skirmishes and problems that people were having. And the same rhetoric that is used today about immigration from Mexico is much of the same rhetoric that was used in the 19th century about the Irish and the Italians. There was a great deal of discrimination against these groups, and many people who were Irish or who were Italian were segregated in ghettos, and they couldn't go certain places. I mean, you think those signs in the South that would say whites only were just about black-white issues? Oh no, they had signs like that in northern states that would say things like Irish, no dogs, no Irish. They would put them together because they were very much discriminated against. They were seen as coming in and taking the jobs and creating problems. So they were majorly discriminated against, and they were not seen as white. They didn't become white until later because race is socially constructed, but we can get into that at another point. But that's era. So if you're Italian and it's 1825, you have one way of seeing and being seen in the world. If you're Italian and it's 2025, it'll be a completely different way. Appearance. I mentioned this about the race. People who are viewed as attractive have greater opportunities and better treatment in society. There have been many studies that document this. And origin. I just mentioned this in terms of citizenship status. Are you here in the country as a citizen? Are you undocumented? That greatly changes the way that you are seen and the way that you see the world. It can change what you do. It changes your opportunities. And even if you are documented and you do have your citizenship, to the extent that people think that you are part of a group in which there are people who are undocumented, that also can play against your favor. So life chances. Our social location influences our life chances. Life chances is a term that Max Weber, who is he's gone now, so who was a 19th century sociologist. He's considered one of the fathers of sociology. He coined the term life chances to refer to one's opportunities to have the following: material goods, positive living conditions, and favorable life experiences. Okay, material goods. What are we talking about here? Well, it's pretty much anything that you own. Nice house, nice cars, good clothes. Those are material goods. Positive living conditions. Where are you living? Are you living in a place in which there is quite a bit of crime? Are you living in a place where there are bars on the windows? Are you living in a place where the police are going to stop you and you have done nothing wrong? Are you living in a place where there are parks and green stretches and your home is beautiful and you have a sparkling pool in the backyard? Those are very different living conditions. Do you have heat and running water? Do you have a place to do your homework so that you can try to have success in school? You know, one time I was out and I was just at my friend's house and we were on the porch and the door of a neighbor opened and this boy came flying out, and then like somebody had just pushed him out of the house, and the next thing you know he was beating on the door and he was crying and he was like, let me in, let me in. And they wouldn't let him back in. And so then he just started, kind of walking down the street. And I was wondering, does he have homework due tomorrow? It was just like a random thought. But I was thinking, okay, he's living in this situation where obviously there's this domestic turmoil. And if he goes to school the next day and he says to his teacher, I don't have my homework, and then the teacher asks, well, why don't you have it? Is he going to say, well, you see, last night my parents got into a violent fight and my dad threw me out of the house and I ended up sleeping, on my friend's sofa, and he's not in my class, so I didn't have a book and I couldn't do the homework? I doubt it. But his living conditions were not positive, and they were not conducive to him having success in school. I mean, even if he had his homework, would he be able to focus? I know I wouldn't have. Now, lest you're wondering Okay, so what did you do? Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have told this story. In any case, I was a teenager myself when this happened, and this boy was not like 5 years old. He was a teenager too. I didn't really know what I could do to help him. I guess maybe I could have run over and asked him how he was doing. Yeah, that would have been nice, or something. But in any case, the point is that his living conditions were not positive. Okay, that's the point. That's the point. All right. And then favorable life experiences. Do you get to go on vacation? Do you get to go to school? You know, these are favorable life experiences. Do you have a chance to spend time with the people that you love and that matter to you? Or are you constantly working? These are the things that Weber referred to as life chances. Our life chances are limited by isms and phobias. Okay, isms. Isms is a suffix that has to do with discrimination on the basis of. Phobias is a suffix that has to do with an irrational, exaggerated, unfounded fear of, and generally hatred of a particular group. Okay, so these are our terms. Let's go ahead and attach them to our social locations. Race. The ism would be racism, discrimination on the basis of race. Sex. Ism, discrimination on the basis of, so we have sexism. Sexuality. Okay, we have heterosexism. Now, this isn't discrimination on the basis of you being heterosexual. It's discrimination on the basis of you not being heterosexual. The other term is homophobia, which is an exaggerated fear, an irrational fear of people who are same-gender loving. Gender. So we have transphobia, because this has to do with there being a fear of people whose gender identity is not aligned with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So we become afraid and treat them differently. Social class would be classism. Classism, discrimination on the basis of class. Ability, whether it's cognitive, physical, emotional, psychological, is what we call ableism, discrimination on the basis of ability. Religion. We do discriminate against people on the basis of religion. There is a term coined as Islamophobia. Okay, so that's one, and that's an irrational fear and hatred of people who are Muslim. Age, ageism, discrimination on the basis of age. Era. I don't know that there's really a discrimination on the basis of era, simply because we're all in the same era. But you know what? That kind of makes the point, doesn't it? Appearance. Appearanceism is a term coined by Anya Cordell. So, you know, if somebody says, I didn't get this job and I'm going to file a complaint for appearanceism, well, they actually won't get very far, because that's not one of the protective classes. I mean, our government doesn't protect you if you are viewed as unattractive, like it does protect or have protections for people on the basis of race and sex. But nevertheless, appearanceism is something that is real and does impact people's life chances. Origin. So when we favor people who are born here, we call it nativism. And xenophobia, xeno has to do with stranger or other. So xenophobia is an irrational fear of and or hatred of people who are not from here. Isms and phobias generally result in the following. Marginalization. This is when we push people away from the center and we say, we don't want you here. Invalidation. What you think, need, want, and feel is less important. Subordination. Making someone feel or be less than. And concentration. Grouping people in unfavorable locales. Now, there has been a lot of research about how these isms and phobias are played out in our public schools. And much of the research, or there's quite a bit of literature on a phenomenon known as the cradle to prison pipeline. And the schools are the conduit through which children are channeled into the criminal justice system. Because within schools, we find that students of color are often given the message, we don't want you here, or you're not as important, or you're not as intelligent, or you're not as whatever. Now, one way that this message comes across is in the types of resources that the students have. Schools in poor areas tend to be overcrowded, underfunded, understaffed, and sometimes the children go to school in deplorable conditions. And sometimes the teachers are not even credentialed. There's been a lot of literature on this. So when children are in schools and in their schooling, they're not getting the opportunities and the motivation and the push from the educators. And it's not just the educators, because I don't want to make this seem like this is a teacher thing. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a teacher. It's a systemic thing, because it's bigger than just the teachers. It has to do with how we fund the schools. It has to do with policies. It has to do with what we allow for certain schools, but not other schools. The things that schools in poor areas are asked or expected to tolerate and do without versus schools in more affluent areas. Isms and phobias lead to problems with representation of the marginalized. So we have misrepresentation, media messages and images that give an inaccurate, misleading presentation of a group. The portrayal reinforces stereotypes. Overrepresentation, being too many in negative situations. So we say that young men of color, African American and Latino in particular, are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. The thing is, you might say, well, if they're the ones committing the crimes, then they're the one who has to do the time. But the other thing that our studies find is that there's the main reason that people are in jail, the number one, is has to do with drug offenses. And that so much of the research, even conducted by our FBI, is that there's really not a significant difference along racial lines in terms of drug abuse or drug use. And when there is some discrepancy, especially among some of the harder drugs, it's more leaning towards the European Americans that are more frequently abusing or using. And so this is definitely a disjuncture here, that we have groups that either use drugs or abuse drugs based on what we know, okay, because a lot we don't know, but at the same rate, and yet one group is overrepresented within the prison system on those types of charges. There's something wrong there. Underrepresentation, being too few in positive situations. How many people who have who are differently abled are in leadership, the highest leadership, CEOs? How many women are in the highest positions of leadership? People who are differently abled, people who are women, people who are of color are underrepresented in the positions that make the power, that make the decisions and have the power. And this influences how justice is carried out within the culture, which is one of the reasons that people who are justice-minded were so excited that there was a record number of people of different races and religions and even sexual orientation elected in this last midterm. People who experience the negative effects of isms and phobias on an individual and or systemic level are referred to as minorities, disadvantaged groups, marginalized groups, and subordinate groups. People who do not experience the negative effects of isms and phobias on a systemic level are referred to as privileged. Let's talk about privilege. Privilege is a set of unearned benefits given to people who have a particular social location. The term privilege was coined by Peggy McIntosh, who wrote about white privilege. And she talked about all the things that she didn't have to think about or worry about as a person who was European American or white. People with privilege in one area are spared from worrying about, thinking about, or even being aware of many of the things that people who face isms and phobias have to keep at the forefront of their mind. Let's take a look at an example talking about heterosexual privilege. Okay, so on the screen is a picture of three couples. There are the two women together, the two men together, and one with a man and a woman. And the sign says, support love. Aww. Uh-oh, now the sign has changed. And instead of support love, it says support heterosexual love. And the two women have been crossed out, and the two men have been crossed out, symbolizing the way in which we alienate and marginalize people who are in same-sex relationships. Not only do we do it on a systemic level, in that people who are in same-sex relationships are denied certain rights and privileges. Did you know that in some states it is legal to discriminate in terms of housing, in terms of employment, on the basis of sexuality? That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so we have this image here, and so that's on a systemic level, what the law allows, but then also in face-to-face encounters. So for the women, there's this voice coming from the distance that says, hey ladies, how about a threesome? So you're just walking down the street with your partner, and you have to subject yourself, you are subjected to someone calling out vulgar or inappropriate things. Or, you're going to hell, as people want to have a self-righteous viewpoint. Or maybe towards the men, two men, disgusting. Or get a bat, because somebody wants to harm or scare and kill them. Now this next image shows the two men blacked out, representing death. And that is not an exaggeration, because one of the things that we find and that we will look at in this course is that people in same-sex relationships are more likely to be the victims of violence and of other acts of harm than people in heterosexual relationships. And in some places, they can't even, it's interesting. Well, it's not interesting. It's really unjust. Because in some places, if a person who is raped, say a man is raped, in some states, the law does not even view that as a sexual assault, because the definition of sexual assault has to do with penetration of the vagina. And if a man doesn't have a vagina, then he wasn't sexually assaulted in this state. So that, again, is systemic. The reason that that's important is that the penalties for sexual assaults are greater than the penalties for just pure physical assault. But if there's no definition of a crime of sexual assault against a man, then that means that that man who is the victim of that assault is not going to receive the justice that he deserves. So not only are people who are in same-sex relationships more likely to be assaulted and harmed, the harm all the way goes all the way to the level of murder. And then if it's not from an outside source, sometimes it's from their own hand, because we find that the suicide rate, especially of adolescents who are gay or lesbian or basically just transgendered, it is considerably higher than the suicide rate for people who are in heterosexual relationships or who have a cisgender identity. Now, if you are in the heterosexual couple, though, if you're a heterosexual couple and you're walking down the street, then you can, if you are like a cute couple, somebody may say, "What a cute couple." So basically, this is privilege. And honestly, I hadn't really given much thought to heterosexual privilege because it's just something that I have, but I hadn't thought about it until I was studying, about these matters, and I became, an ally and really have gotten into my allyship. But before that time, I hadn't given a thought to these things, that I could walk down the street with my then husband and not worry about someone assaulting us because we were holding hands, and not worry about someone hollering, they might holler racial slurs, but they weren't going to holler, homophobic slurs. These were just things that I just didn't have to think about. But now, with more study and awareness, I am aware that I have heterosexual privilege. Just to continue on with the example, having heterosexual privilege means you don't have to worry about people asking you rude questions or making assumptions about your sexuality. Like, what do you think caused your sexuality? Your heterosexuality, excuse me. People ask that question to people who are transgender. What caused it? Same thing that caused yours. This is the way I was born. The American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, Sociological Association, and Medical Association have all concluded that people do not choose their sexuality. So to ask someone what caused their sexuality is a really weird and inappropriate question. If you are not asked that question, you have privilege. The majority of child molesters are heterosexual. Do you think it is safe to expose children to heterosexual teachers? What kind of logic is that? Just what do men and women do in bed together? How can they truly know how to please each other, being so anatomically different? Okay, yes, these questions are basically turning the situation around and saying if we lived in a society that was homocentric instead of heterocentric, then people who were heterosexual would experience something completely different. And it might be that you would experience getting asked questions like this. I got these questions from a heterosexual questionnaire. There are many questionnaires that are online for people to be able to check their privilege. Now, privilege and disadvantage. Because being privileged in one area doesn't mean that you're privileged in another area. Oh man, I just really butchered that. Let me see if I can say that again. Being privileged because of one of your social locations doesn't mean you won't be marginalized because of another. We all have multiple identities that intersect and influence how we are treated and seen. The impact of having multiple identities is what Kimberly Crenshaw termed intersectionality. Okay, so let's look at an example using former President Barack Obama. Harvard-educated Senator Obama, before he became president, had class privilege. Okay, so there we have this nice picture of President Obama. And to have class privilege is represented by the fact that he went to Harvard. It's not a cheap school by any means. Lived in a nice big house, drove nice cars, has money to buy dresses for Michelle and the girls and grandma. Probably had a maid and was able to have nice vacations. So these are all the things that Weber referred to in his definition of life chances. So, even though he had all of these privileges that are associated with class, it did not mean that he did not have some disadvantages associated with his race. So, racism made it harder for him to do something as simple as get a cab. So there he is, Senator Obama, a man with a high status position, just walking out of the Capitol, going to the curb, trying to hail a taxi. Taxi, taxi, and what happens? He wrote about it in his biography. He said that when he was senator, and he was basically not known like he is now, it was very difficult for him to go out and get a taxi because taxis in Chicago were notorious for driving past African American men. It didn't matter that he's standing there in a $1,000 suit. No, it didn't matter. The taxi drivers just saw the brown face, and all of the associations and stereotypes and assumptions with that impacted whether or not he was able to catch a taxi. So here we have this image of this taxi driver, and his voice is saying, "Sorry, dude, I don't stop for black men." Okay, and that's the Capitol that Obama just came out of. That's the image of that. And it says the caption, "Liberty and justice for all?" as a question. Because we all have multiple identities, it is unfair and inaccurate to say that a person who is white, European American, has never experienced oppression. This is a very important point, because sometimes when we talk about privilege and we talk about oppression, it can look like we're only talking about race, and there's so many forms of privilege and oppression. And this is why the idea of intersectionality is so important. Because just because you are European American, just because you may have white privilege, does not mean that there are not other areas in which you can experience oppression. What about someone who is white and gay, or white and differently abled? And just because you're white doesn't mean that you are going to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are afforded to the majority of white people in the country based on race. And that's where this wonderful quote from Alan Johnson is useful. Now, I had you read the entire article, but I just want to take this one quote from it. And he says, "It's important to note that privilege does not guarantee good outcomes for the privileged group or bad outcomes for everyone else. A white person, for example, can work hard and have little to show for it, can be mistreated by the police without cause, be denied a job they're qualified for. What privilege does is load the odds one way or the other, so that the chance of bad things happening to white people as a category of people is much lower than for anyone else, and the chance of good things happening is much higher. Now, privilege is not something that a person can have like a possession, where's mine? Let me go down to the store and buy some privilege. Well, okay, I'm supposed to just be reading, sorry. Instead, it is a characteristic of the social system, like a rule in a game in which everyone participates." So again, that was Alan Johnson, who wrote this in his article on privilege. Now, the interesting thing that I like about this is how he's saying that it's a game. It's the rules of the game. This is the way the system is set up. And it's not, this is very important, it is not a game that you can say, I refuse to play. In the sense that whether or not you are asking for it, you have it. I didn't ask for heterosexual privilege. I didn't earn it. I was just born with it. So whatever privilege we have, the point is that we didn't earn it. We didn't do anything to get it, but there are certain benefits that we have as a result of being in a system that values some groups over others. So you don't want to participate? Sorry. The only way to not is to change the system. Multiple privilege. Now, some people are privileged in every area. Not a lot, but some. So here's this guy standing over here looking sleek in his suit. He says, "I'm a 38-year-old, upper middle class, nice looking, able-bodied, able-minded, white Christian, heterosexual male, born and raised in the great US of A." So he's got pretty much all of them. What do I want to change, he may ask. The answer may be nothing. Because people who are privileged, number one, often don't see their privilege. And when you don't see something that is benefiting you, it's hard to see how that same thing or that not having that is hurting others. So you don't necessarily see any reason for change because you don't see the problem. Because you don't have to see the problem. And you can just adopt the attitude, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. On the other hand, some people use their privilege to fight for justice for all. Example, the presence of European American middle-class people actively participating in the civil rights movement and the demonstrations during the 1960s helped to bring about changes in the laws and customs of the American South. There were many European American Catholic priests who joined arms with African Americans and other people of color in marches in which they could lose their lives. There were many European American women who were willing to offer rides and drives during bus boycotts, and they experienced the repercussion, because anytime you try to challenge the system, there will be repercussions. But people put their privilege aside or used their privilege to try to give advantage or take away at least the disadvantage to people based solely on their color. So, this class adopts a social justice perspective, and that we're not just here to study criminology, we're also to be thinking about working towards change. This course is a course in the social justice curriculum, and so that is absolutely one of the goals. The social justice program at Mount Sac is new. In this fall, will be the fall of 2019, will be the first time that students can register and claim social justice studies as a major. I'm very excited about this. I'm very proud of this. I have been chairing the task force for the social justice, the creation of the social justice program at Mount Sac for the last several years, and so I am looking forward to seeing the students that come through this program. And again, this course is one of the courses listed as applicable for the degree. And as the degree states, it's not just about understanding, although that's important, but some people are going to want to take that understanding, and we are here to equip people in this program to take their understanding and work towards social change. And so you might ask, well, what would motivate privileged people to work towards social changes that lead to a more just society? Because here's the deal. Every single person listening to me, every single person under the sound of my voice, or who's reading the captions for what I'm saying, has some type of privilege. And we can, again, use whatever privilege we have to work towards change. And one of the first steps to do that is listening with compassion to the voices of the marginalized. I found this image of a person with really big ears because it's to symbolize that there's more listening than anything. Just in case you're not actually looking at this and you're just hearing me, I didn't go find somebody, like a real person with big ears, so we could have them in our PowerPoint. This is clip art, a clip art person with really big ears, cartoon with really big ears. Standpoint theory. Now, one of the things as we go through this, and even some of the research that we will read, adopts standpoint theory. And standpoint theory says that those with privilege in one area are generally blind to the struggles of those who do not have privilege in that area. This is a point that I just made. Listening to other privileged people discuss the plight of the marginalized is like the ignorant teaching the ignorant. So, when people are like, oh, let me tell you what this other person's experience is like, and the other person is right there. It's like, well, why don't you just let them speak? In fact, in relationships, one of the signs that the relationship is an abusive relationship is when one person speaks for the other. Oh, no, she doesn't want that. Oh, no, he doesn't need that, but maybe he wants it. No, I know what he needs. That is dominance, and it's a sign that the speaker is putting their own interests above and over that of the person for whom they claim to be speaking. The third point of standpoint theory that we're going to explore is that when privileged people look at the world from the standpoint of the oppressed, that's very important, standpoint of the oppressed, they get an entirely different picture. A standpoint is a viewpoint. The viewpoint of those on top of the world is very different than the viewpoint of those on the bottom. So here I have this image of the globe, and it's not really a globe, it's just the world, okay, but imagine a globe. And if this is not visible to you. And underneath the world is a little stick figure person, and it looks as though the world is on their back. And on the other side, on top of the globe, is another stick figure person, and that person looks like they're dancing. Well, if you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, literally, the world looks very different than if you're on top of the world dancing. The privileged must be willing to take the role of the learner, not the leader. Have you ever been with somebody and they're talking about something and then you're like, what do you know about that? Because they're talking about something of which they have no experience. The privileged must learn to listen more than they speak. And if they choose to become allies with the oppressed, they must be careful to not speak for the oppressed, because doing so reproduces the very hierarchies of power that they are challenging. Again, this is the point that I just made. All right, in our last screen or two, I know this has been long. I want to again ask you the true or false question, or make the statement. The United States is a land of equal opportunity. True or false? Well, while this may not be true yet, the more we learn about the strengths and challenges facing all of those who live in this land, the better chance we have of creating a society in which there truly is liberty and justice, including criminal justice for all. Well, we have reached the conclusion of this PowerPoint. As always, if you have any questions or if you'd like to make some comments, I hope that you will do so. Send me an email, post something on the discussion board. I'd love to see where your minds are, and I'd love to see what your thoughts are regarding social justice. Thank you.